attending our evidence-based program grant, fund code 117-225B. My name is Moira Connolly. I'm with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and I work there in the Center for School and District Support. And today I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues, Erica and Karen, if you two want to introduce yourselves.
I'll go quick. Erica Champagne. I'm the director of the Office of Effective Practices, which oversees some of our grant programming in the statewide system of support and Center for School and District Partnership teams. Welcome.
And I'm Karen Johnston. I'm the also work in the Center for School and District Support. I didn't say that right, did I?
Center.
I worked in the same center as Moira and Erica, and some of you will know my name because I am the Student Opportunity Act coordinator, and I'm connected to the development, working with districts around the development and submission of SOA plans. And you got an email from me yesterday, just yesterday.
Somehow they have a name to the face or a face to the name. So, okay, so we're just going to go ahead and jump in because, you know, again, to respect your time, we're going to introduce you to this grant. So with the inception of the Student Opportunity Act came some grant funded through a trust. So not typical state funding, not typical federal funding, but trust funding that doesn't expire with the fiscal year. But the legislation attached to it asked that it be contingent on using evidence-based practices to close achievement gaps for students. So the past few years, we have released in FY21 the evidence-based practice grant, and most recently the Rural Innovation and Efficiencies grant, which was a 2-year grant funded for FY22 and through fiscal year 23, which ends in June this year, or in 2023. So in developing this next grant, we wanted to kind of consider this post-pandemic context at this point and support some of the recovery that's going on in schools and districts. So the purpose of this evidence-based program grant is essentially to close gaps. We want to improve educational opportunities for all students so the learning experience is equitable, but also share best practices and try to make things more efficient within and across school districts if possible, which is why we had that rural grant in FY22 and 23. So when we were developing this grant, we looked at several different pieces that we needed to inform how we were going to release it or develop the grant itself. So as Karen said, she spearheads all of that SOA amendment work and the plan work. And Erica and I were part of the team that read those. So we looked at those, the most recent Student Opportunity Act amendments, SOA, I say, and we looked at what people wanted, what people were prioritizing, but also where folks were in terms of implementation. Were they already fully implementing some of these evidence-based practices that they had chosen? Or were they still kind of in the beginnings of implementation? So we looked at that. Then we decided to look across DESE and see where there might be some funding gaps. So let me just get rid of that. So we talked to all of the program folks that are the contacts for each one of these evidence-based practices to see what kind of grant funding they had available to fund that particular program area. And so what we wanted to do was kind of focus on those program areas that didn't have a whole lot of funding behind them, but were definitely needed by schools and districts. And then of course, we looked at some data from the most recently released MCAS to see where there's some achievement and opportunity gaps happening. So we used all that information, and that kind of gave us our rationale for how we developed and what we landed on in terms of this particular grant opportunity. So this is how we landed. We decided we needed to ensure this was a focused grant. So we decided we're going to see which 4 evidence-based practices were in the most need. So for instance, our first one, co-teaching and inclusion, that was selected more than any other evidence-based program area in the Student Opportunity Act plans by districts. And there's not a lot of funding behind it. So we decided that would be a good use of funding to put behind co-teaching and inclusion. Then we landed on early literacy as well, because in looking at MCAS, we found that the third graders, or 3 to 5, were really struggling with literacy, in particular idea development and writing. And it makes sense. Those were the kids that were kind of stuck in this horrible space during COVID. So we thought that might be a good place to throw some money to. Then expanded learning time, which is kind of my grant that I've administered for the past 11 years at the department. And ELT has traditionally been funded through a line item in the state budget, but that line item has been reduced over the past few years significantly. And it's been harder for people to implement it in the prescriptive way that it's been laid out in the legislative language. Just to point out, ELT is in the form of a longer day or a longer year. For instance, you'll do a 7-hour day instead of a 6.5-hour day. It's not a summer program. We have other grant opportunities for a summer program to implement that. And then we found that one of the things that is going on across the nation, but we're hearing that from superintendents as well, having a lot of trouble with a teacher shortage, recruiting and retaining educators, in particular in hard to staff schools and positions. So we decided that might be a really good place to support schools and districts in a way that could be sustainable and really beneficial to them in the long term. We're also offering the option to have a district determined evidence-based practice based on our SOA guidance materials that you'll find on our website. It's linked in the RFP. But we are prioritizing those first 4. And if a district comes up and says, I want to do one of these other evidence-based practices, that's fine. They can submit that as part of their plan, but their rationale would have to be really very compelling, because we're really trying to provide a very focused funding opportunity for folks. So underneath each one of these grant options or these program area options, we have selected a short list of evidence-based strategies. So we do have a document that will be linked with the RFP called Appendix A, and it goes into far more detail than what you're seeing on your screen right now. But these are strategies that are evidence-based and support that evidence-based program area. And again, because we wanted to focus this grant so much, we decided we're gonna give a short list of strategies. I'm not going to read all of these for you, but I do want to highlight one from each one because it may seem cloudy. So under co-teaching and inclusion, you'll see continuous instructional support listed as one of the strategies. So this might be in the form of an instructional coach that maybe your district can't afford or your school can't afford, that you could support through this grant. And if it's co-teaching inclusion, it might be someone with a really strong special education background or really strong WIDA expertise, but they would need to be coaching both the general ed and the special education and ESL teachers, just to make sure everyone's on board with these really effective practices. Early literacy, we're hearing that there's a real need for reading interventionists. So that might be an activity that you want to fund through this grant, is training or hiring reading interventionists and finding time for them to deliver intervention. ELT, you'd be adding time in a very flexible model, and you would decide you can implement all 3 tenets of ELT, which would be core academics, collaboration, and enrichment, or one or a combination of any of them. And then recruitment and retention of staff. We do have links to certain things, but one is grow your own. And we're seeing across the country that there are states that have really found some good success with grow your own programs. So that was something that we included in one of the strategies that you might choose to implement underneath your evidence-based program area. In terms of the grant, we do have some competitive priorities. The legislation mentions a focus on rural districts, so that would be one of the competitive priorities. What we call short form districts. These are districts that have received less than 1.5 million in additional Chapter 70 funding in FY22. We decided that some of the districts who didn't get that much in the additional Chapter 70 funding, they may have started some work that really has some promise, but then because the funding wasn't there, maybe they had to abandon that work or cut it back quite a bit. So we wanted to make sure that there was funding available for these districts to go ahead and keep doing something until they're all doing it with fidelity and really successfully. The use of our data equity pause protocol, that is linked in the grant application, and it does give you some competitive priority points. We'll get to that later in the webinar. So I'll give you some additional information on that later. And then districts and schools in chronically underperforming status, which would be our former level 5. Oops. I don't think. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
It's not, my slides aren't forwarding. Okay. There we go. Okay. So some of the highlights for this grant, one of the things that we're really excited about is because it's from that trust funding stream, it doesn't expire, as I said, with the fiscal year. It doesn't expire with a federal fiscal year or a state fiscal year. So we thought, let's do this for 3 years. That'll provide people some time to get some traction, and then it'll be a reliable funding stream for them. So you can kind of predict what you'll be getting each year for the through FY25, so that you can do your budgeting and you don't have to worry about it. So that's something we're really excited about. And it also will provide people time to plan it, pilot something, implement, figure out how to do mid-course adjustments, see what's working, monitor. And then in FY25, we expect full implementation with fidelity. And you need to prepare to sustain those practices beyond the duration of the grant, which would end in June 30th, FY25, 2025. So that's kind of one thing that we're really excited about, because we don't ever get 3-year grants. And if you're trying to retain and train teachers and things like that, it's handy to know that you have the funding. So in terms of the funding, we have approximately $9 million available for schools and districts. I'm going to say 9 million plus. Again, we have the trust funding, which is generally $5 million. Then we have some ELT funding that we're rolling into this in the hopes that anyone doing ELT currently will start to, sunset that line item grant that expires every year and try to do this more sustainably without so many prescriptive rules attached to implementation. Districts will be able to apply for between $50,000 and $300,000 annually per EBP. So in EBP, I'm sorry, is evidence-based practice. Awards will be based on the size of the district and the school in the scope of the proposed project. So some projects we realize will be much less expensive than others. We'll have you do an estimate. Because the timeline for FY23, which ends June 30th, 2023, is kind of tight, we would expect a little less to be allocated this time around. And then next academic year, we would expect to be allocating much, significantly more money in FY24 and 25. So you can kind of plan around that, thinking, what can you do in the rest of the school year this year, and what can you do in the next 2 years? Just a caveat, all dollar amounts are estimated and approximate. They could change. If more funding becomes available, it'll be distributed under the same guidelines that appear in the RFP. So in the RFP, we will have a document called Frequently Asked Questions, or FAQ, and it'll have a lot of helpful information that might answer some of your questions as you're going through, writing the application or going through the RFP. There'll be a link that you can access with all those questions and answers. But one question we thought we would want to highlight for you today during the webinar is, if I choose one evidence-based program, would I be able to use grant funding for activities that may be aligned with one of the other evidence-based programs? And the answer is yes. As you see, these are all so intertwined in so many ways. So for example, if you decide we really want to focus on co-teaching and inclusion, but we just don't have enough special education teachers or ESL teachers, so you're going to use some of the strategies under recruiting and retention of educators in order to fully implement the evidence-based practice that you've selected. So in that case, the strategy under retention and recruiting staff would be a grant-funded activity, whereas your grant is aligned with the evidence-based practice of co-teaching and inclusion. So that's something we're aware of. As you're looking through, we have an Appendix A that goes, as I mentioned, that goes through each one of the evidence-based practices and the prioritized strategies very clearly. And you might find, geez, I want to do this, but some of these are really good from several other of the evidence-based practices, some of the strategies. So we encourage you to use that document as a working document for yourselves. In the application itself, you'll see here on this screen, it's the part 3, or the narrative is an Excel spreadsheet. So, you kind of see the chart there. There are several tabs at the bottom. The one we're on right here is the district info and instructions, and that's just kind of general information. Everyone will fill out the tab that says district info and instructions. Everyone will fill out the tab that says data. And then you'll notice we have the evidence-based program areas for the rest of the tabs all the way through district determined evidence-based practice. You will choose one of those tabs. So in total, each district or applicant will be filling out 3 tabs for their application, only 3. You're choosing one evidence-based practice. Hopefully that makes that pretty clear. Some of the questions though, are very similar. So you'll choose one evidence-based practice, you'll choose one or more prioritized strategies within that evidence-based practice. And on each tab, we have listed all those prioritized strategies that are on the appendix that you'll also see in the RFP. And we'll ask you to lay out kind of a general plan for implementing that evidence-based practice with fidelity through FY25 and beyond. We know your plan will change probably by May. You'll say, geez, we need to switch things up. We said we were going to do this and whatever. We expect people to, look at their data, look at their monitoring, look at the student needs, and have to be agile and adjusting to that. So here we're really just looking for a general plan that we realize might change. Some of the common considerations across all of the tabs: how will the district support the work? How will you, this is an important one, how will you monitor progress? How will you know that it's working? What data are you going to be looking at on a regular basis that will allow you to change it up if needed with urgency and with immediacy? Or if it's working well, how can you push it to the next level? Which strategies will you focus on most strategically? So you'll find one of those strategies listed on the evidence-based practice, and you'll say, just this one could move the needle, and let's really focus on that. And then what's your anticipated 3-year plan? Like I said, very general plan with an eye to sustainable implementation at the end of the grant duration. Specific considerations to certain EBPs. If you choose you want to add time, this year, FY23 through the rest of the school year, it's going to be a planning grant only. unless you're a current ELT school and you're implementing additional hours in your day, you can continue to plan, but this is a planning grant this year. It's hard work. You need to involve your stakeholders, including your union. You need to negotiate contracts. This year's a planning year. We would expect implementation in FY24 and 25. Recruitment and retention, we'll ask you to be innovative to meet long-term goals. So we're asking that you use these funds to set up systems that you will need beyond the grant duration to make sure you have the staff you need, or have strategies to be able to find that staff that are really high quality staff. We know there's a big paraprofessional shortage right now. A lot of people got emergency licenses. So this is one where we would ask you to be creative in what you want to do. The district determined program, as I said, will want a data-informed rationale in that tab. So we'll be asking for some really clear data to explain why you're choosing something outside of the 4 that we're promoting. Now, I mentioned before, we're giving some priority points to those of you who use the data equity pause protocol that's contained in our Center for School and District Partnership Coherence Guidebook. It's linked here. It's on our website, the guidebook, but also there's a link in the slides here for the actual protocol, and you'll see that on the right. That's what the beginning of the protocol looks like. It's really very straightforward. It asks you to look at data as a team and see where there might be some gaps in terms of who is benefiting the most from what you're choosing to do. So if you use that protocol and then you answer the question at the bottom on the left, district, of course, is spelled incorrectly. I apologize. That's on me. What district instructional priority might address equity issues or gaps given your understanding of the data? So that's something that if you use the equity protocol and you answer that question clearly, concisely, and thoughtfully, then that's 5 additional points in this competitive grant. And then the due date. Thursday, January 26th is the last day we can fund FY23 grants. So that's what we're doing. We've intentionally made the application pretty straightforward, not a ton of questions to answer because we know this is a really tight timeline at a really tough time. Beyond that, you'll have the reapplication. It'll be a non-competitive reapplication going forward in FY24 and FY25. However, your reapplications will ask for evidence of progress monitoring and adjustments that are made as appropriate, as well as any kind of dissemination practices, dissemination of best practices that you are using or intend to ways you want to disseminate. More specifics will come with the reapplication as it's posted. But just be aware that if we see that you're really not progress monitoring, if you're adjusting, it's not in response to the data you're using, it's not really making a lot of sense, things aren't adding up, you risk not having your reapplication accepted. So that's just something to keep in mind. And we are certainly here to support you in all phases of implementation and planning. So we're not going to leave you, hanging in the wind and saying, I don't know what you mean by that. So we will be here to support you in all of that. So now we'd like to see if anyone has any questions. I see there are some in the chat. I'm going to get back to, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. And looks like Erica answered some of your questions. Erica, do you see any that jump out?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of call them out really quickly. One just came in, which I think is a brilliant question. Is the RFP available somewhere? Unfortunately, is not posted yet. We have been waiting for it to be posted for several days. We were hopeful it would be posted by now. Unfortunately, it is not, but we do expect it any day now, but we wanted to continue to hold the webinar so that you had information. And so as soon as it's posted, you'll be able to sort of have this context so that you can, work your way through the RFP. So we will expect that it will be posted soon. And the due date is January 26th, 2003. So it is not 1/6, it is 1/26.
Okay.
And then, no problem, Deb. All right, let me just scroll back up because I do know there were questions. I was encouraging folks to put them in. So we had one question about, is there data that can be shared to support the success of any of the chosen priorities? Or are there districts that have demonstrated success that are willing to share? So a sort of two-part answer to that. One, the evidence-based program areas that we've selected come from the Student Opportunity Act 3-year gap closing plan guidance. And that document is on our website. And if I'm able to multitask in a minute, I will get you a link to that, or maybe Moira can grab it for me. Yeah, where the guidance is. And there are links in that guidance to evidence to support each of the 20+ evidence-based program areas that are supported through the Student Opportunity Act planning guidance. And we have selected 4 of those to focus in on for this particular grant opportunity. So you can find evidence there. Also, part of this grant opportunity is there's an ask of those that apply, that we ask that you all share best practices as you are implementing these strategies. So we'll be coming back to you throughout the life of the grant to be able to try to disseminate best practice as much as we can.
Erica, this is Karen. Were you looking to have a link to the resources page dropped into the chat?
Yeah, the guidance.
Oh, did you already do that, Moira?
I did. I'm trying to load up the indicators as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, any resources Karen or Moira want to put in the chat would be great. There's a question about, could an applicant develop an application for more than one area of focus? So Moira did cover that a bit, but the short answer is yes. So you can, we know that things are connected. But we ask that you just sort of bucket them under one. The other answer to that question is, are we looking for districts to give us applications that are like, we're going to focus on early literacy, and we're going to do co-teaching and inclusion, and we're going to have our own district determined like priority area? That would be a no. We do really, number one, we only have a finite amount of funds, and we want to be able to fund districts and share these resources as widely as we can. But at the same time, we really want districts to be focused in using these resources in a way that can really, build sustainability and capacity in your districts. And so we'd appreciate that you focus in really like one strategic area, evidence-based program area. We had a question about literacy coaches be considered for an increase in teacher capacity. Absolutely, yes. And when you're able to read the attachment A, you'll see some very specific, guidance and strategies relative to building capacity for early literacy coaches and reading specialists, et cetera, across your district or in specific schools. And there's a question about, do all the competitive criteria have to be met? There are some, each of the applications will be scored based on a score sheet. And then so yes, you'd have to meet all of the criteria that's in the score sheet. And then there are, I believe, maybe this question is asking a little bit about the competitive priorities. And no, you do not have to meet each of the competitive priorities. So, there's about 3 or 4. You'd need to meet at least one of those criteria. You'll get points for like each one. is basically the easy way. Did I say that right, Moira?
Yeah, you don't have to meet any of them. It's just you get extra points for each one of them.
Correct. Perfect. All right, I'm still navigating. We have a bunch of resources. Will we be able to create partnerships with those outside of DESE? So if, working with a partner to deliver on any of the strategies that you want to leverage through this, grant opportunity, absolutely, you can partner with outside partnerships, and the department has several resources available to help you find, pre-qualified, highly vetted partners. We can provide you, access to that information if you need it, but otherwise you can certainly create partnerships and use that as part of your application. And so feel free to continue to put questions in the chat, or you can bravely come off mute. There are 56 folks here. Hopefully we won't have technology issues, but you're welcome to come off and ask a question, but you also can continue to use the chat, and we'll stay here for a few more minutes.
There's one, the eligibility requirements. That's pretty simple. If you're a public school district, you're eligible. That includes charter schools. However, we do ask that you have a submitted SOA plan, which you should. I think there are very, very few districts that haven't submitted one that meets statutory requirements. And if it didn't, we would have talked to you about it already. So.
And I think what's exciting about this grant opportunity is that it really is open to pretty much every district in the Commonwealth, and that's why we do have some competitive priorities, because this is a resource that is supporting the Student Opportunity Act, which is supposed to be supporting all of our districts across the Commonwealth to support students who are least well served. So,
Deb, I'm wondering. I just want clarification. A continuation of your previous plan. Do you mean your originally submitted SOA plan?
Yeah, so we used the funding last time around to fund our universal screener for our elementary students. And so I'm just wondering if a continuation of that is possible or
Yeah,
not.
we, like I said, and I believe Canton and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, is a short form district. And this was designed to say, geez, short form districts might be getting some traction and then they just don't have any money left. So, this is designed to support that work that you've already got going that is showing some promise. We would ask with this money, since it's 3 years, that you really put a broader focus on that early literacy beyond just the screening. But, submit a plan, submit an application, and it should be aligned with what you're trying to get done, for sure.
I think that's an important point too, is that, we touched on at the beginning of the presentation a little bit about the grant from previous years, right? And like 2 years ago, there was a specific set of EBPs we were focusing on, like there was teacher diversification, there was still some of this literacy work, et cetera. And then, we've updated this list to focus on 4 sort of, some are similar, but some are new for various reasons. But you should be able to, make some connections to the work that you've been doing in this space. This really is to support your efforts to serve students.
And actually, those screeners are one of the strategies that we're promoting. That's short list of strategies.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've been really happy with the screener that we brought in. But my thinking is around our special education teachers and thinking through like, what's the next step for them? Like, as we think about an RTI model, and if we're trying to reduce the number of kids that are getting referred for special ed, to try to get more differentiation of instruction happening based on what we're finding in the screener, that might be an area that we could use some support. So that's my
Yeah,
thinking.
and
for
that
this
makes
one.
sense. That's exactly how you should be thinking. This is what the data is telling us. Where do we go from here? So this
Yeah.
grant would certainly support that.
Yeah.
We're due to expect. Oh, Chris. Oh, hi. How are you? We expected it to be posted already, so hopefully any day now. I have put my email in the chat. So once it's up, if you could all shoot me an email with the appropriate contact person to send the link to. We'll also put it in the Commissioner's Weekly update. But if you want to shoot me an email, once it's up, I can send the link directly to you. Again, I'll put it in the chat again.
And I put a note in the chat earlier that we will be posting the slides and the recording of this presentation up on our website. I gave a link. We can drop it in again just to make sure that you have it. But you also can feel free to contact Moira to say, hey, I heard you were going to post that somewhere. I can't find it.
Yeah.
I can't find anything on DESE's website either half the time.
It's not easy.
And I'm on it every day. So don't blame you, but just reach out to Moira and she'll definitely get you the information.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy holiday break to all those.
Yeah. Any more questions that we could answer for you?
Hi, I have a question and I'm definitely not gonna frame it the right way. So I'm just gonna kind of start to talk and then hopefully I'll find the right words along the way. So I'm relatively new to grant writing and I was wondering if you could talk us through the prioritization process, considering that this is open to so many districts. I was just wondering how you all thought about determining who qualifies based on the need. And for example, if you were a district that maybe didn't have as high needs as other districts, would it be more strategic to ask for a lesser amount to increase the likelihood of receiving it? Or does that not really matter? And it's more, we just look at the need first and then we grant the amount regardless of what the amount is, because the priority is servicing districts with a high need. So that was very wordy. So I apologize if that was all.
That's actually a strategic question to ask. While this grant, we do look toward, ELT really is designed to serve low income populations. The way you develop your grant, you'll look at your data, you'll see what you need and how much you'll need to be able to implement that with fidelity. So, we'll prioritize those districts that, a lot of kids are in that low income bracket. Obviously the rural folks, people who receive rural aid. But other than that, any part of your budget or your drafts, it's really based on what do your kids need and how much is that going to cost for us to deliver it really, really, really well to them.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, that, I mean, you really did ask a great question, but the criteria that we use is actually more focused on the quality of the proposal of how you want to use your funds. That's grounded in a good data analysis and root cause analysis. And then we factor in the need of a district. So number one, you have to have a really good idea, right? And make that clear to us. But then number two is that we're prioritizing specific districts based on that specific competitive priority criteria. And so that's how we sort of balance the high quality application and the need of the district. So they sort of go together. Oh, that's a great question. Anticipated award notice date. So we do not have a hard and fast date. However, we know that time is of the essence and we want you all to have these resources as soon as possible. So there's a few factors that go into the when we'll be able to make announcements, and some of that depends on how many applications we get and the amount of staff effort it will take to review all of them and go through a competitive review process. And then we will get answers out to districts and schools and notify as soon as we can. But I think our goal is that, sometime in February, you would be hearing if you have been awarded.
Thank you so much. I actually wanted to ask another clarifying question regarding the funding request. So Moira, you mentioned earlier that you can request 50,000 to 300,000 annually per EBP. Can you clarify? I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly that we're really applying for one based on our proposal based on one EBP.
Mhm.
Therefore, we're not like if we're kind of dipping in two buckets, we're not requesting necessarily double the funding.
Right.
Okay.
You're just funding one.
Great. Thank you.
And that range, it also considers the size and scope of your proposed strategies, but then also, the size and scope of students that would be, served through that. So that's why there's a bit of a range, but it's, you all know your districts and what it would take to accomplish specific strategies. And so we encourage you to put your best thinking out there. And then we'll make funding decisions based on, again, high quality, competitive priority, and available funds.
Andrea has a good question in the chat, which is timely because we just had a discussion about looking at data. MCAS is great data. It's very helpful. We have a lot of other data tools at the department that are really super helpful in doing your root cause analysis. That'll break things down by, as you're asked to do in the Student Opportunity Act and in your Chapter 70 plans, break it down by student group. So you may, in doing your data analysis for your application, we ask what data you're using. It shouldn't just be MCAS. Maybe you're looking at chronic absenteeism. Maybe you're looking at your vocal data, which is so helpful. Why are kids absent? Oh, look, I'm looking at their vocal data and they don't feel safe. That might be why they're not there. Things like that. You should be triangulating your data with several different pieces of data. Don't get overwhelmed, but you should be triangulating it to formulate some kind of approach and, figure out which strategy would work best for you. But certainly, definitely use the MCAS data, but there are other data sets that you might want to use. Even your interim data is really helpful and it's more frequent. MCAS is once a year. And yet that might not cover, if you're looking at early literacy, maybe you don't want to look at graduation rates. You know what I mean? So looking at the right kind of data for what you want to do and who you need to serve the most, who's least well served. And we can certainly help you. We can connect you with someone who can go through a couple of those tools with you. We can certainly help you, with some of our data that we have access to. But we encourage you to use those screeners, use those, your dibbles, things like that. Andrew, does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I think even if I'm pretty data driven, so everything I look at is through that lens first. Mm-hmm. And even if you're looking at particular groups within the context of subgrouping, you're still looking at the results of each of those subgroups, and those results are coming from MCAS. So if you have special education kids that aren't making it, right, then you're looking at MCAS. If you, with the exception of dropout rate, which can often be driven by the inability to pass MCAS. I mean, it's just sort of to me, the elephant in the room. Like, this is really even broken down into its minute form of looking at subgroups and need and low income and different demographics throughout, and then testing that against absenteeism and all of those other indicators that are driving that. I think that the end all be all in determining need is based in that set of information, that data. And so I understand that. I just think it's important that it's just stated because it's the way it is.
Well, that's where we're finding the gaps. That's where we're
Right.
seeing the gaps because we're federally required to do that.
So I'm
But
curious.
But that isn't where you're going to find your strategies. You're going to look
No.
at those gaps and then look at the other things, the other contextual pieces of data that might give you a more clear picture that's specific to your students. It could be very different where you are than it is. It may be the same student group, but the contextual difference can be found in some other data sets that make maybe your students with disabilities, the root cause be very different than it might be with, the same student group in another town. It could be who the teachers are in front of them. There's so many different ways to look at data in a triangulated way. But if you're looking to serve your students with disabilities, I'm not sure if you've kind of honed in on co-teaching and inclusion, or are you a high school or are you a elementary school, or is it just the whole district?
We're a whole district. Oh, well, I'm the whole thing.
Oh, so you're
And
getting
so,
data.
yeah, and our high school tanked on MCAS. So we're high, 73% high need, 68% low income, 29% special education at that high school. So there are a lot of things going on, and it's grades 8 through 12 and very needy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 8 through 12. And when the 8th grade came in, our scores went way down. Like, there's just all this stuff going on, right? So, but I think that the problem really is what I see is that I want to find a linear solution, because we've done a ton of stuff. We have done some really great stuff, and we've been to early screenings since 2014. So this is like, we're very on it. So that's not the issue. We know that. But what I'm trying to get to is, so we have these priorities that have been identified through SOA, and they're fantastic. So, okay, great.
But if they're not working, that's where you need to
no,
dig
I know ours are working, but they're not MCAS related, and it's 3 years old, and our high school kids are not there yet. Like, those kids aren't in high school yet. So because you have to think about the years it takes for kids to get from where they are to where they're going. But my point is that if you have successes and you use the data set from MCAS to determine those successes through the department, because you're watching, someone has done these ABCD things, right, that have been priorities in their SOA over the last 3 years. And as a result, their MCAS rates have gone up in whatever subgroup they were focusing in on as a result of these strategies. I think that would be
doing those strategies with fidelity and constantly monitoring the progress and adjusting accordingly. So it's all about execution at that point.
Right, but I just would love to be able to hook in with someone who has done that.
That's what it's all about, is that dissemination piece. That's super important. We do need to identify who's been doing it really well.
I'll just jump in really quick. So Andrea raised a really good point, right? It's like, we don't want to build an entire system that just says that MCAS data is the only data that anyone's looking at to talk about our students, being well served across the Commonwealth. So each of the evidence-based program areas sort of are managed by teams, right, at the department. And that is, you know, a charge that we all have in any of the ones that we're, you know, working on very diligently, is to be able to disseminate best practice, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to build over the next few years, you know, unfortunately, SOA took a little bit more time with the pandemic to really kick in to high gear. And so we're hopeful that, you know, we're going to be able to take a pulse across the Commonwealth, you know, on an annual basis, or even more regularly than that, to be able to say, here, what are we seeing in terms of best practice, and share that out. So I appreciate the note, you know, the reminder that we don't want all of our benchmarks to be 100% MCAS focused, and that there should be other ways that we measure progress as well.
And we do need those dissemination pieces happening. We need to find, you know, people who've done it really well and kind of figured out something that maybe would benefit everybody else or other people in similar contexts.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah,
So thank you.
thanks. That's a great question. Let's see, do we have any other questions in the chat? Just, I keep checking my email to see if it's posted yet, but it's not
Oh,
posted.
I know. I just actually double checked again. I was like, wouldn't it be awesome if it got posted while we were
I
talking?
know, we could just put it in
We
the
know
chat.
it's close. We're just not quite that close, I don't think. But yeah, I mean, we're happy to continue to take more questions, but also, you know, Moira shared her information.
Yeah.
You can reach out to her directly to ask follow-up questions, and also keep an eye out for, you know, the posting and some of the links that we shared here. You can bookmark our grants page so you can see when it becomes live. And thank you all for your interest. We're really excited about being able to give this additional resource to support your work.
Yeah. And again, a lot of you have been emailing me. Go ahead and shoot me an email if you want me to just send you the link directly, instead of trying to find it on our website and all that other stuff.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out.